No mercy for the debt sheep sent to the slaughter. Martin North, John Adams, in the interest of people. John, what a title.
What a title. But very important show today. A lot of people caught short with the RBA's increase in the official cash rate by 0.5%. So now they took it to 0.85. And I think in the 24 hours prior to the decision, I did a poll on Twitter, and the bulk of the people in the poll thought it was only going to be 0.25. So now I thought 0.4, because I thought they would go to a nice 0.75, but they went the full 0.5%. And that obviously has a big impact. And that impact, Martin, is basically the second decision in 4 weeks. So we think the first Tuesday of May, now we've just gone past the first Tuesday of June, 4 weeks, 2 decisions. And now we've got another 4 weeks on the 5th of July, where there'll be another decision as well. And within the space of literally 8 calendar weeks, it's going to be a dramatic impact for a lot of households across the country. And it's going to be very interesting to see what happens in terms of all the issues that we've been discussing for all of the years. I mean, so we've been warning as early as 2018 to get your debt under control. Don't follow the mainstream media. Don't buy into the whole property bubble mania. You and I practice what we preach. We have no debt, so we're sort of sitting on this at the sidelines, just waiting and seeing how the economy is going to unfold. And like we said in the last show, the RBA are making now these dramatic decisions, and they say, even as late as yesterday, saying we don't have the full understanding of what the impact will be. And whereas before they said more of a macro statement, we don't know exactly how the impact is going to be. What they said yesterday was specifically household consumption. So this whole bubble circles around households and household debt tied to property, and the one most sensitive aspect of the economy. The RBA said yesterday, we're raising these rates and we're going to put a knife in the heart of the bubble, and we don't know exactly how it's going to play out. So we're walking into the abyss. This is what is called data dependency. We're going to see how the data unfolds, but obviously one of the interesting aspects of this, Martin, is because they are making decisions in a relatively quick fashion. You're not going to get data to really assess the impact before it's potentially too late for certain people. So unfortunately, there will be, in this aggressive interest rate tightening campaign, there will be a certain number of households that will go bankrupt in the process. And just like we said in the last show, the elite don't care about these people. So there could be 3, 4, 5% of households, they'll say, fine, default, or we're going to really slam you in terms of your financial situation. All that the elite are worried about is ensuring that the financial system, i.e. the banks, don't go bankrupt. But there will be a whole host of people who bought into the mainstream narrative, signed contracts that they should never have signed because they were just astronomical sums of debt, and now they're going to be sort of sent to the slaughter. And now you and I are going to portion some blame on some of these elite institutions today, but ultimately, the government and the RBA and all these people and the mainstream media who encourage everyone to basically get into the property market at these exorbitant sums, they're ultimately going to call caveat emptor and say, no one put a gun to your head to sign the contract. You sign the contract, so it's on you. And unfortunately, for a set of households across the country, it's going to, again, so once you go through this devastating process of being forced to sell or potentially going through a mortgage in repossession situation, the impact on your financial life could really set you back years.
Yeah, it is worrying, of course, but I would make the point, John, that I measure financial stress, so flow stress, right? A lot of people prioritize their mortgage repayments over pretty much everything else, right? So I'm already seeing in my data some people giving up on dental treatment, for example, and pulling their kids out of private school and putting them into the public system instead, simply because they're trying to get by. The trouble is, of course, that if rates go on going up, this is a huge acceleration in terms of drain on the finances. And the question is, how long will people be able to survive? And the buffers that everybody keeps talking about, and I get very frustrated about this, the buffers are not equally spread across all households.
Yes.
We've got a bunch of households that are fine. They've got plenty of buffers. They're well paid ahead, no issues. We've got other households that really have nothing at all. They're hand to mouth, paycheck to paycheck. And now you've got this impulse of inflation and higher debt as well. So it's a very concerning situation.
Yes, one of the comments I just made to you before we started recording is that the next 6 months is going to be a very interesting referendum on your entire sort of data set, your business model, your methodology, because it's clear to me, for example, I think you did a show in the last couple of days on DFA, and your data saying is 43% mortgage stress, 46% rental stress, and particularly on the mortgage stress, whether it's the RBA or the government or people like Stephen Koukoulas, market commentators, none of them are recognizing the problem that you're trying to highlight. So it seems to me that there's a disconnect between what you're saying about stress and what the institutions and the elite are saying in terms of how much stress people can take. And so I take your point, it's not all evenly distributed, but even in your appearance today on the Today Show with Carl Stevanovic, Carl basically opened up his commentary and said, even though these rates are going up, a lot of people should be able to absorb it, surely.
Well, and my response was, for sure, some can, but some can't. And it's interesting that if you look at some of the ABS data, in there, they actually do say that there are a proportion of households who have no savings at all and are living hand to mouth, right? And I'm very concerned about the rental sector, because the rental sector is underreported in all the mainstream media. And yet we know that rents have gone up dramatically in recent times. And we're going to see more rent rises ahead, because probably investors are going to try and recover some of the interest rate rises that they're seeing on their mortgages through higher rents. So this is why the rental sector is as critical to think about as well as the owner-occupied sector.
Yes. So before we get into some of the key points we want to make today, is that perhaps we should just make a bit of commentary about the title. Now, some people may take offence to the term debt sheep, but there are clearly people who followed a mania. And basically, particularly FOMO, this was a psychological process. If I don't sign this mega mortgage, I'll never get in. And rather than actually understanding how cycles work and how if you print too much money, you're going to have an inflation problem at some point. And then, and obviously, in order to have some credibility, you'd have to raise interest rates, again at some point. People should have tried to work out or anticipate exactly what they should, where things could have been going over the next little while. But the key point, I think, that you taught me last year in one of our shows in the beginning of 2021 is, how do people make these decisions before they sign the contract? And the decision is, can I afford the repayment today? And people don't think about 6 months ahead, 12 months ahead. There's no scenario analysis. There's no thinking, okay, how am I going to actually pay off $1 million worth of debt? It's just that if I can afford the repayment today, and assuming my circumstances are not going to change, I'm going to sign that contract. And that is a very, and forgive me for saying, a very foolish way of in doing your personal finances. I mean, when I did have a mortgage, some people think that I'm an extreme pessimist, but in terms of my thinking, when I had a mortgage, I always thought the worst case scenario. What happens if I lose my job? How long can I survive before I default on the mortgage? And what can I do to ensure that if I did result in a disastrous cash flow situation, that I can hang on to the property without, and can continue on without losing it. So now, throughout when I did have a mortgage, people thought that this was extremely negative, and they pretty much said you're very gloomy and how you don't live a particularly positive life because you think in these terms. But if you're going to actually be financially prudent, you've got to hope for the best and prepare for the worst. And people basically hoped for the best and prepared for the and prepared for an extremely unrealistic situation. And now the chicken's going to come home to roost for a lot of people. Although, again, I just want to re-emphasize what we've said over the last few weeks is there will be pain, but then there'll be a point where the pain will become too great, and that's when we think that they're going to take the foot off the accelerator. But the question that no one knows is how much pain is the RBA willing to take? So what's their resolve? But also, how much pain can households take before the economy and the financial system starts to get into trouble?
Yeah, and I'd be looking at buy now, pay later, for example. I'd be looking at credit card debt, which is rising in some areas of households at the moment. But I just want to reflect on this, John. The propaganda over the last 2 or 3 years on get in the housing market, buy now, RBA governor last November said rates won't go up until 2024, right? We had Michael Zucker basically saying, of all these wonderful home grants, go and buy now. I remember I actually questioned last year whether that was financial advice that he was giving, right? Everybody was actually on the same property drug, but nobody was actually thinking through what if it goes wrong? What happens if rates vary? And of course, they always said, well, the banks give us 3% buffer. But the trouble is, the 3% buffer it is not on real household spending currently, right?
No.
Because inflation's been running so hard. So even if it was 3% okay then, things have changed. And it's worth reflecting now, of course, that 3% buffer, which still exists, is now on a much higher base because the rates have gone up.
Yes. One point on that, Martin, is that it never made sense to me why anyone would sign a mortgage in 2020 and 2021. And the reality for me is that, so if we have a situation where we're going into lockdown, we're coming out of lockdown, the rules around COVID-19 were changing, potentially, week to week or day to day. How could now some office workers could have some certainty because they're able to work from home, but for a broad base of the economy, just that uncertainty about what's my income going to be, am I going to have a job, what's going to happen to the economy, what's going to happen with the virus. So much uncertainty, I would be reluctant in that environment to commit myself to a 30-year contract because I don't know, particularly in the short term, what is going to happen. And yet there was a whole bunch of people who were... Now, speaking to a local real estate agent, I know that in 2021, a lot more people during lockdown were comfortable to sign a big mortgage contract compared to 2020 because they said, well, we saw what happened in 2020, so and we've got a good feel for how this is going to run. So even while lockdowns were happening in 2021, people said, well, I'm comfortable because I've gone through it the year before, so I'm going to commit. But still, it just seemed to me because a lot of some of these mortgages were signed even before the introduction of the vaccine mandate, and that's what's caused income problems for certain people depending on their medical choices. And you've got to think to yourself, was that the most prudent decision given so much uncertainty about employment and income?
Well, you have to ask that, but I do think you shouldn't underestimate. It is propaganda, from all sources, right? And there's, discussion at the barbecue, what the Reserve Bank was saying, what the bankers themselves were saying, what the real estate sector was saying, and everybody then saw property prices rising. And I remember even 6 months ago, a lot of people saying to me, you're wrong, property prices are going to go on going up, right? So people believed that there was no ceiling to where prices could go.
Yes.
But as I always remind people, credit and interest rates fundamentally define the way that the markets work.
Yes.
And with interest rates going up, credit's going to be tightened, property prices will fall.
Exactly. Now, one point I just want to make is that there were some people on Twitter yesterday, like Kukulis and others, saying that the RBA has restored their credibility by raising interest rates by 0.5%, and this is a demonstration of the resolve to tackle inflation. Now, this is just a completely laughable proposition that the RBA governor has any credibility. And I just want to actually highlight a tweet from Elise Morgan, who's an ABC journalist. So let's put this on the screen. She put out a tweet just after yesterday's decision and said, quote, "Today's RBA decision will come as a horrible shock to some households who took the RBA's communication that rates won't rise until 2024 at face value. RBA hiked by 50 basis points, taking cash rate to 0.85%. So there were people who took the RBA's statements at face value, and they made decisions based on that. And again, so the RBA governor has been heavily criticised, and he said last month it was embarrassing in terms of this forward guidance. And the reality is that he should fall on his sword. I mean, I don't understand how we have people in senior positions, and we're talking about he's the most remunerated public servant in the country. So the Prime Minister is being paid $500,000, the RBA Governor is being paid $1 million, and you think to yourself, well, you're being paid that level because we expect high quality decision making because of how important monetary policy is. So if you're going to be paid $1 million to actually do the job, and you screw up to this level of degree, to the point that you've misled thousands or hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of people, and now you've screwed them over by raising interest rates, there has to be some form of accountability. And one of the points I'll make is that I think whether we're talking about parliamentary accountability in terms of the Westminster tradition, but also in terms of bureaucrats, there has been a decline in accountability. And whereas here's one of the famous things that I just am continue to be stunned about. When Argentina invaded the Falkland Islands, the British foreign minister resigned on principle because he said, because I didn't anticipate what the Argentinians were going to do, I failed the British government, and he resigned. And apparently Margaret Thatcher tried to talk him out of it, but he just said, no, I've disgraced myself as the foreign minister because I didn't anticipate the move of the enemy. I must go. Well, I mean that level of accountability and principle is just completely absent in this country. And people who do a bad job in public service when they're being paid extremely high levels of income need to face the music at some point. And again, I would call for the RBA governor to, the only way to restore the RBA's credibility is for him to resign and for a new governor to come in place who can basically give some forward guidance. Because any time the RBA governor now says anything, people the level of trust and again, so there's two types of trust in this. There's the trust of the market, but then there's the trust of the ordinary citizen listening to his comments. Well, that trust between the citizens has collapsed, and so I think we need a new person who can make amends and basically say, well, forget about Philip Loeb. What I say you can take on face value, and I'm going to give you proper guidance so that you can base your financial decision making based on the statements we make from here on in. So I think that's the proper course of action, but perhaps I'm a traditionalist and perhaps old fashioned.
I don't think it'll happen. I'll make the point though, John, that I think the RBA is simply aping other central banks around the world, and I actually don't think they're very good at crafting their own strategy from the ground up. I think they're much more reactive to what's going on. New Zealand started lifting rates in November. The UK started lifting rates. The Fed has started to lift rates. Now all of those central banks are all talking about the battle against inflation, right? 6 months ago, none of them were. They're all talking about transitory. The trouble is it's groupthink. And they almost get out of jail simply because everyone else is doing it. But I agree with you. There should be much greater accountability. There's no doubt in my mind that the RBA took rates too low, too quick, for too long. And we've had lots of estimations of forward projections on wages growth and inflation way off the mark.
Yes.
Well, why are they there if they can't actually do the basics?
That is the $64 million question, Martin. I have no idea. But at some point, and to be honest, now that we have a new government, I would have thought it'd be a political prudent move for the new treasurer to basically remove the old guard and bring in someone new and basically say, well, Philip Lowe was part of the old regime and he screwed up under the previous government's watch. So we're going to actually have someone who can do the job better. And I think that would be a good political move for the treasurer to do so.
Well, it'd be interesting to know what the scope of their review of the RBA is, because, of course, the RBA was just wanting it to be a review of their yield curve control strategy, et cetera, right? But there's a really much bigger question about what is the role and function and accountability of the RBA. I think Chalmers should actually, open the aperture to really start asking some of those deep questions, because they have done us no good service over a decade.
Exactly. So now, in terms of what does yesterday's decision mean? So let's actually put up slide 2, Martin. Now, this comes from a particular article from the Financial Review, and the sources from Rate City. Now, in the course of so we're talking about 2 rate decisions within the course of 4 weeks. So for a $1 million mortgage, which is over 25 years, which off camera we said most people in Melbourne, Sydney have at least got $1 million mortgage plus. Now in some other capital cities or in regional areas, the mortgages would be less, but $1 million over 25 years, in 4 weeks, your monthly increase over 2 decisions by the RBA has gone up by $393 per month, or $4,716 per year. So an extra almost $5,000 per year that you've got to stump up because of 2 decisions in 4 weeks. I mean, that is quite a bit of income, particularly for particular families. Now, before I get you to comment about what is this going to mean for stress, there's a lot of speculation about what's going to happen on the 5th of July. So now there are some people saying it's going to be 0.25%. Some people say that they'll go and do another 0.5%. So if they were to do another 0.5%, what that would mean is in the course of 8 weeks, the monthly increase in a repayment of $1 million mortgage would go up by $657 or $7,884. So the real interesting aspect of this cash flow analysis, Martin, is that as they make these dramatic because one of the tricks of the mainstream media is they make these decisions in complete isolation. Little increase here in May, a little increase, or like a bigger increase in June. Now another increase. But once you start to add this all together, again, and there's plenty of people in Sydney and Melbourne on $1.5 million, $2 million mortgages, but people are now being given within the course of 4 to 8 weeks, a bill of an extra $5,000 to $10,000 that they have to stump up with, and in an economy that's going to slow down for certain workers, that is going to be a huge ask.
Yeah, I think it is, John, but I wouldn't be surprised to see the bank starting to almost do a sort of a mortgage keeper type strategy, maybe extending the life of the mortgage, or finding a way of, spreading the interest payments out further. We're going to see some of that, because without it, this is going to be a disaster, in my view. The rule of thumb is 1% increase is a 15% uplift in monthly repayments on average for a 30-year mortgage. That's a lot of money, right? And if it keeps coming up, 1%, 2%, the markets yesterday, after the announcement, are forecasting rates at 3.9% by the middle of next year.
Yes.
Now, I don't think they'll ever get there, as we discussed the other day. But even if the RBA is right at 2.5%, that's a series of escalating moves which will really, really get people caught. They won't be able to have free cash available to make those payments. And okay, there are lots with buffers, we said earlier, but there are lots without buffers. And then the question is, what do? How do they hunker down? What do they stop doing? Yes. Where do they make savings?
Yes.
Becomes the question.
Yes. Now, I mean, one of the main areas where I think you're going to feel the pain the most is not the owner-occupier segment. I think it's going to be in terms of property investment. So basically, if you're a property investor, and so we record our shows on YouTube, Martin, and every time I watch on YouTube, there is all these promoters yes. who are basically saying you can become wealthy on you can take $50 and create it into $1 million, or the thing is that there's one promoter out of Melbourne who said the only way to get rich is to get into as much debt as you can, and then use that debt to your advantage. So you have all of these people promoting different investment philosophies, and so where I think you're going to start to see an immediate reaction is that obviously for those people in the property sector. Now, some of them will have negative cash flow properties. I mean, even Lindsay David, one of our sort of colleagues, he was on Twitter yesterday saying a whole bunch of positive cash flow properties will now turn negative because basically the cash flow dynamics are going to change. So obviously, there are a number of investors who have set up properties on a sustainable cash flow basis, and some of them are just sort of put them out there and just let them slowly work themselves away. Well, the investors now going to be called potentially to put in more capital injections to keep those mortgages going. So that's one. And then the other thing is that you've got falling capital value. So if you're holding an asset and the value of the asset's falling and the cash flow yield is actually worsening, no doubt I think you're going to start to see some investors become spooked, and that's going to, and you're going to see some additional selling among the investors, let alone it's going to kill off new investors coming into the market to invest. So why would you invest when you've got a falling knife?
Well, as I mentioned earlier on, the worry I have is that rentals are already going up and they will go up higher because that's the only way that investors can actually, basically cover the cost of their increased rates. But the interesting point also is that there was a review done in Ireland after the crash there in 2007, 2008, and they identified that it was property investors leaving the market and just selling out at any price because of the falling returns that actually was one of the major triggers.
Yes.
And I have a feeling, bearing in mind that our property investment sector is bigger than it was in Ireland as a proportion of total mortgages outstanding and total property outstanding, that we've set ourselves up here for another point of failure.
Yes. Now, in your, I think, Monday show, your property rant, in terms of the one that you do with Edwin Almeida, both of you talked about the increase in terms of listings. Now, only in the last couple of days did the Financial Review have a story and talk about, let's put this on the screen. It says, older listings surge as vendors struggle to sell. So they're saying that if a property has been on the market for 6 months or more, the number of those properties are going quite up dramatically, and that's happening in Melbourne and Sydney. Now, from a microeconomic perspective, Martin, is that in a free market, I mean, if demand meets supply, you have equilibrium, and then the deal gets done. So when you have a glut of properties on the market and they're not moving, well, what does that mean? Is there's a problem with the price.
Yep.
And so what we're seeing now is that vendors are now rushing to the doors. And you've said this, I think, even in your show last night, your live show. You're saying that there's a lot of people trying to, either by choice or by force, liquidate their position. But if you have a level of debt and you need to sell the property to pay off for that debt, you've got a particular price point that you don't want to fall that you don't want to fall below. And the unfortunate thing is that the market is moving quite rapidly, because not only is the decisions by the RBA moving fast, but the psychology of the market is changing quite rapidly as well. So what are people willing to pay now compared to yesterday, or compared to 4 weeks ago or 8 weeks ago? It is changing. So there will be a point. So I think so. John Maynard Keynes talked about sticky prices, and that was largely in when he was talking about contracts and how prices sometimes don't adjust compared to how free market philosophy. But we do have a situation here of sticky prices in terms of real estate, and there will be some sort of psychological reckoning that some vendors will have to go and just say, I'm not going to get the price that I want. I have to cut my price to get the sale. And that may mean that I walk away with no profit, or it may mean that I sell the property and I still owe something to the bank. And where I thought I had equity in the property of hundreds of thousands, it could evaporate quite quickly.
Well, paper profits are nothing, right, until you actually come to crystallise them. And if you find when you come to crystallise them, the value is actually a lot lower, you may have nothing left. I'd also make the point, John, that I expect to see some bottom feeders coming in, and they could be hedge funds who will be buying up property cheap, and maybe people who are pretty well off and have got money to burn that might actually decide that there's actually property now that's looking cheap, and then buy it again, looking beyond the cycle. That's precisely what happened in the US. And of course, there are big investment firms in the US still buying up cheap property, yes, even now, and essentially accumulating in private equity firms in particular, massive portfolios of property. That's part of the story that is not fully understood in Australia. I expect it to be a very important part of the story going forward, though.
Yes. One of the interesting stories that you told me about yesterday, Martin, was about some of your local conversations here in Wollongong. And one of the things I think you said to me off camera was that some of the agents have said that the bottom has already fallen out of the market, and that if you want to get a sale in Wollongong, the current price will not sell, you've got to at least cut 10%. And that was 10% before yesterday. So now that we've had yesterday's decision, who knows, maybe if you want to sell in Wollongong, you have to cut 15, 20%. And that's going to be, a huge fall for a lot of people who bought at the top of the market.
Well, it depends. Some properties with views, and particularly if they're houses with sea views, they'll probably hold their value a bit better. But your bog standard, less good property, or indeed some of the apartments, of which there are many being built still down in Wollongong and the surrounding area, they're already seeing massive falls. And I would remind you, I keep coming back to this, but North Ryde apartments, right? They hit their peak price in 2017. They never recovered through the last 4 or 5 years. Just a very important object lesson. Prices don't always go up.
Yes. Now, when we think about so if we're starting to say we're seeing the beginnings of a deflationary cycle. Now the key point on this, Martin, is that we are starting to see deflation in the sense of the property market. Although as a broader economy, we still have a stagflation sort of situation. Even the World Bank is raising the alarm bell about stagflation. But how does this process actually work? Now, I've done some. Look, I remember doing a presentation about this back in 2019. But basically, in a bubble, you have a whole bunch of, you have a misallocation of resources in the economy. You have a whole bunch of labor, capital, entrepreneurs, land being pushed into a segment that shouldn't get the amount of resources that they have. And so once you start to unravel that bubble, those sectors that are tied up in the bubble, they're the ones that they feel the pain the first. So which are the key sectors which are tied to this household debt bubble, property bubble? It's the finance sector. So banks and mortgage brokers. It's real estate sector, real estate agents, etc., auctioneers. You've got the construction sector, and then you have the retail sector and the service sector. So we've had a whole bunch of growth in types of these businesses, and the number of people being working in these sectors, the level of incomes that they have been earning have been quite high compared to other sectors in the economy, and there's obviously a lot of jobs. So as the rates start to go up and as the economy starts to unravel, well, it's these sectors where you're going to start to see some of the pain the first. So the pain won't be uniform across the industry, like across the economy. It's in particular segments that are particularly tied to the bubble. And even if we just put up slide 4, Martin, there was just an article in the AFI that I saw today that the property companies listed on the Australian Stock Exchange are already down 20%. So you're already starting to see a whole bunch of companies tied to building properties or property management. They're all starting to fall in value because they're expecting that their business profits are going to reduce as well. So now it's important to note that part of the reason for raising rates is because of supposedly robust economic growth and record low unemployment. Now, unemployment is always a lag factor. So now, even before you get people unemployed, what's going to happen, well, what's probably already happening now as we go forward, is people's income are going to fall. So business profits will go down. There'll be people being asked to take pay cuts, and those pay cuts, even if you don't lose your job, is enough to really tip you into a financial stress situation. So if you've got inflation, if you've got rising interest rates on a big debt, and if you've got your income being compromised, that puts you in a very difficult situation. So, if people say, well, we're going to wait for unemployment to go sky high, things can start to get really nasty even before you get unemployment. And one of the classic things that I think Eddie Hobbs told us back in 2019 about Ireland, well, who are the ones that typically get into the most debt? Real estate agents, in terms of bank employees, construction workers, because these people who work in the bubble tend to believe the propaganda the most, and then they go overcommit. When things start to unravel, it's these types of employees that actually get into the trouble the first, but also the most.
Yeah, I agree. And I'll make one point. I don't think the retail sector's done at all well over the last 2 or 3 years. I wouldn't put them in the same category as the financial sector. And a lot of small retailers are sitting on these lock-up shops. They've had leases parked at the moment at a certain level, but those are all going to unwind now. A lot of those retail people are going to actually fall over too. And I actually think the retail sector and the commercial property sector is worth watching, because I think that's where we will see some of the early cracks. I actually think in my SME surveys, I'm really seeing some of that. So I'm watching that very closely. But I make the point, a lot of those retailers have mortgages on their existing property, the residential property, to fund their business. And so this linkage between the SME business and its commercial operation and the mortgage on the property is another nexus that needs to be understood. And again, I don't think many people really understood the connections between the two.
Sure. Even though you say that in terms of retail businesses not doing particularly strong over the last couple of years, the key point to make that is that, as like you said at the beginning of this program, as people prioritise payment of the mortgage, discretionary spending is going to fall.
Absolutely.
So even if they were struggling the last couple of years, their ability to generate income going forward is going to go down dramatically.
That's it. Well, I think we're exactly on the same page, John, and that's my point really, that I think we should be watching some of those industry sectors, because I think that the issue there is already pretty far gone. And remember the other point we made the other day, that the ATO is now starting to demand payment of outstanding debts?
Yes.
Great timing.
Yes, indeed. Now the thing is that so we are on track. Now again, don't want to be too alarmist, but if the RBA continued on this path and they said we're not going to stop, where's the ultimate destination? It's Ireland. And Ireland's a better measure for us compared to the United States. And we've said this over the last few years, because what happened in Ireland was that middle to upper income people held most of the debt, whereas before the GFC, poor people with these subprime loans held a lot of the debt. So our debt distribution profile in Australia today is very similar to what happened in Ireland. Yep. And I would say with all these factors that you've just outlined, the situation perhaps in Australia is perhaps more dire and nasty and potentially more volatile than what Ireland was facing in, say, 2006, 2007. So if we were to, if Philip Lowe said we're going to go all the way, we're going to raise rates and we're not going to stop, it will be Ireland. Now, at some point, and this is the whole thesis of the last few weeks, they don't want Ireland to happen, because it means that the banks will go bust. And so at some point they're going to stop. But what we don't know is when that will be. Yep. And how much pain will be inflicted. But just to give you a sense as to what were the early warning signals in Ireland and what we could be expecting here in Australia. So let's put slide 5 up. So these are some things that I remember Eddie Hobbs telling me back a number of years ago. These were the early signs in Ireland of the crash happening. So falling credit growth. Now, you've talked about credit growth plateauing, yep. So we're going to start to see it to fall. Falling property prices, well, again, that has started. Poor sales of new property, well, we're seeing a listings glut, so sales are going to start to fall. Falling discretionary consumption, we've already talked about that. Forced credit reviews. You've even said in the last couple of days that people are starting to get tapped on the shoulder by the banks and saying it's time to sell. Increased household savings. I mean, that probably hasn't happened yet. So that's a bit of a delayed phenomena as rates start to go up.
The savings housing ratio is falling now.
Yes.
Right? It was very high. It's been falling. A lot of people have been raiding their savings just to get through already.
Yes. So the other one is difficulty of paying school fees. You've talked about that. People are now contemplating switching their children from private school to public school. The dropping of health insurance, where you just talked about people are foregoing dental services, yep. And then reduced cafe and in terms of restaurant traffic, etc. So some of these signs we're starting to see. These signs that happen in Ireland will intensify here in Australia. And the question will become is, at what point will the alarm bells go off and say we can't go beyond that? Now, at that point in which they say stop or we're going to pause, whether it's here or the UK or the US, that's when you're going to have a dramatic reversal in the fortunes of various financial markets. But in terms of those who are worried, the short-term impact, it's going to be slaughter for a certain percentage of households. The question is how many? And the question is, have you set yourself up that you can get through this period okay? And if you're in some trouble, what's the best decisions that you can make over the next 6 months that can give you the best chance of minimizing any potential financial harm that you may experience. But unfortunately, just to go to the top of the premise of the show, is a whole bunch of people swallow the propaganda, signed mortgages that they shouldn't have signed, didn't do proper due diligence, and now the chickens are coming home to roost, and the elite are going to basically adversely impact thousands of people across the country. And at the end of the day, they don't care, because it's caveat emptor, and they say, you made the choice, it's your decision, and we're just going to get off scot-free.
Yeah, unfortunately that is. No accountability. I mean, two points though. One is people can still do things, get a cash flow, understand where your money's going, start prioritising now. And the second is there are still people who are locked into higher rate mortgages than they need to. So go shop around, use the portals to find the best rates, because you can still get better rates. And if you can save 25 basis points by switching, that will save a bit of money too. So there are things that people can do, but it's not going to be enough.
Yes.
A lot of people are going to get caught, but they're caught because of many years of, propaganda, frankly. People swallowed it, and now, unfortunately, as you say, chickens coming home to roost, and sheep being taken to the slaughter. A few other metaphors come to mind too, right?
Well, the only thing I'll say, Martin, in conclusion, is that some people think that my attitude is quite callous, but to be honest, I have had people over the last few years call me nuts, crazy. I'm a conspiracy theorist. I'm an extremist. And particularly on this subject, I've tried to be as measured as I can, but tried to give people both the contemporary and the historical perspective, so that they actually understand the magnitude of the problem. But when it comes to propaganda, hey, the Germans swallowed it back in the 30s, and basically Germany was destroyed under poor leadership, and people are swallowing propaganda now.
Fortunately, it's true, John. Very important show. Thank you very much for your time today. And we'll keep updating as we go forward and see how things develop.
Absolutely.
Martin North, John Adams, Interested People. We'll see you next time.